Part 3. The City of Baghdad. The city of Baghdad was known for its beautiful buildings, its running water, its public libraries, and its thinkers. Philosophers, scientists, astronomers, and writers came to Baghdad to study, to learn, and to write books. One of the most famous Islamic books, The 1001 Nights, takes place in the palace of the Caliph in Baghdad. In the book, sailors, soldiers, and explorers tell the Caliph all about their adventures. One of the sailors is named Sinbad. Sinbad tells this story about himself. When I was a young man, I had more money than the king. I bought myself the best food, the finest drink, and the most beautiful clothing. I did nothing but eat, drink, and go to parties with my friends. But one day I discovered that my money was almost gone, and I had done nothing all my life but enjoy myself. I thought, before it's too late, I want to have an adventure and make a name for myself. When people hear my name, they will think, Sinbad was a great explorer, braver than a lion. So I sold everything I had left, even my fancy clothes. I used the money to buy clothes for traveling and food for a long journey. Then I went down to the harbor and set sail with a group of merchants heading for foreign lands. We sailed over the sea for weeks and weeks, stopping at one island after another to trade and to buy. We were tired of sailing and weary from our trading when we saw ahead of us the most beautiful island in the world. It looked like paradise. Tall green trees shaded soft, lush meadows. Flowers grew blue, yellow, and scarlet along the edges of clear running streams. "Land!" called out the captain. "Let's sink our anchor here and rest for a while." So we all left the ship anchored on the shore and wandered through the dim, cool gardens and sunny fields. Some of the men built fires on the shore and roasted meat for a feast. Others swam in the sparkling streams and washed their clothes. I walked in the grass, for it had been a long time since I had felt solid ground under my feet. I could smell the roasting meat on the breeze, and the scent of food made me hungry. I thanked Allah that He had brought us to this beautiful place where we could rest and eat. Suddenly I heard frantic shouts coming from the shore. The captain had climbed back aboard our boat where it lay up against the stand. He was screaming, "Run! Run for your lives! Leave your clothes and food and get on board! Allah save us! This is no island, it's a fish!" And when I looked around me, I saw that he was right. A great fish as big as a mountain had settled in the middle of the sea. It had been there so long that sand washed up on it and trees grew in the dirt. Covered with ground and grass, the fish looked like an island. When our sailors built fires on the shore, the fish felt the heat and began to move. I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet as the fish shuddered and twisted. Dirt began to fall away from the fish's gigantic back. Beneath my feet, I could see glittering, moss-grown scales. A huge eye rolled up at me. The fish was awake and angry. Men were fleeing back to the ship, leaving their pots, their food, and their clothes on the heaving sand. But I was too far away. I was still running across the sand when the fish shook itself and leaped high into the air. Trees, grass, flowers, and streams all flew away in a cloud of destruction. And then the fish hit the surface of the water with a thundering crash. Water sprang up all around it, high as a mountain, as it dived down into the surging sea. Waves swept over me. My eyes and mouth were filled with water. I kicked frantically, seeing only the glitter of green sea all around me. I could hear the shouts and cries of my fellow sailors, also struggling in the sea. I thought that I would drown, but Allah sent my way a wooden tub washed from the island. I climbed into it and huddled in the bottom while the waves tossed me this way and that. And as I watched, our ship disappeared into the distance, the terrified captain sailing away as fast as he could, ignoring the shouts of the men stranded in the sea. Night came. All that night and all the next day, I sailed in my wooden tub, pushed about by the wind and waves. I suffered terribly from thirst and hunger. The sun beat down on me. When I dangled my feet over the tub's edge to cool them in the seawater, fish rose to the surface and nibbled at my soles. But as dark began to close around me again, I saw that the tide was carrying me toward a mountain island, with trees bending from its sides almost down to the water's surface. My tub washed beneath a tree, and I grabbed its branches and pulled myself up onto land. My legs were numb and cramping, and I had not slept since the fish island dove into the deeps beneath me. So I threw myself down on the shore and slept like a dead man until the next morning. When I awoke, I managed to get to my feet and look about me. I found trees that bore sweet figs and apples, and springs of fresh sweet water. So I ate until I was full and drank until I was no longer thirsty. I thanked Allah for sparing my life and began to explore the island. Birds sang sweetly in the trees above me. The soft smell of flowers drifted past me, but I could not see any sign of man. Was I alone on this island? I climbed a tall tree so that I could look around in all directions. But I saw nothing but sand, trees, the sky, and the mountain rising above me. I looked and I looked for some sign of life. Surely I could not be the only man on this island. Finally, I saw far away on the other side of the mountain some great white thing in the middle of the trees. It was too smooth to be a rock. Perhaps it was a building. I noted its direction, climbed down from the tree, and began to walk towards it. I struggled through the underbrush and over rocks for hours until my feet were cut and bleeding. Finally, I arrived at a clearing in the trees. In the center of the trees, a huge white dome rose to the sky. I walked all around it, but there was no door or window in any wall. I beat on it with my fists, but it was not made of stone. The thick white walls were warm and hard, and I could not make any dent in them. I tried to climb up it, but the sides were so smooth and slippery that I could only get a few feet off the ground before I slid off and fell. By now, the sun was sinking towards the sea. Dusk was creeping up around me. I thought that I should find myself a place to sleep, but as I turned away to look for shelter, I saw the sky grow suddenly dark. The light of the sun was blotted out. The air grew cold around me. I thought that a cloud had come over the sun, but then I saw that an enormous bird, as white as a cloud and as tall as a mountain, had swooped down over my head. So large was this bird that it blotted out the sun. I was so amazed that I fell down on the ground, hoping that the bird would not see me. And I remembered that I had once heard a sailor tell of a huge bird called the roc that lives on faraway islands and feeds elephants to its babies. Then I knew that the enormous dome was the roc's egg. Part 4. Sinbad in the Valley of Snakes. The gigantic bird settled down on the dome, spread its wings over its head, and fell asleep. So I got carefully up, unwound my turban from my head, and made a rope from the cloth. Then I tied the cloth around my middle, crept up to the rock, and tied the other end to its thick, scaly leg. For I thought to myself, if the bird flies away, maybe it will take me to a land where there are people and cities, and then I'll escape from this island. I was afraid to go to sleep. What if the roc flew away while I was sleeping? So I spent the whole night sitting with my back against the roc's egg, my waist tied to its foot, waiting for it to wake up. When the first light of the sun glowed red in the sky, the roc stirred. It spread its wings and rose up off of its egg, carrying me with it. We rose so high into the sky that I thought we would leave the earth altogether and travel into the darkness of the air beyond. And below me, the island and its dome were the size of grains of salt, scattered on the blue of the sea. Finally, the roc flew over land. Little by little it began to descend, coming closer and closer to earth. As soon as my feet touched the ground, I began to untie myself. I had been shaking with fear. What if the roc took off again? Or what if it saw me and pecked me up from the earth like a grain of corn? But the bird never spotted me, and as soon as I was free, I ran away from it as quickly as I could. Soon I saw it snatch something from the ground with its enormous claws and rise back up into the air. It carried a snake as long as a tree and as big around as a man. I kept walking until I found myself at the edge of a valley. Through the valley ran a river too wide to cross, and tall mountains stood all around the valley's sides. Then I thought to myself, I should have stayed on the island. At least there I had fruit to eat and water to drink. Here I have no food and no water, and I can never cross those mountains. But soon I recovered my courage and began to climb down into the valley. As soon as I put my foot to the ground, I saw that it was studded with diamonds as big as my fist. I filled my pockets, my turban, and my cloak all full of those diamonds. Perhaps I can make a raft, I then thought, and float down the river until I come to a city. But as I came close to the river, I saw that the shores were swarming with snakes as big as palm trees that would swallow an elephant in one gulp. I was too afraid to go further. What can I do? I cried out. I will never escape this place. And where can I sleep to be safe from all the snakes? For night was beginning to fall. As I staggered along, weary and frightened, I saw ahead of me a flat place with a cliff rising up above it. Eagles circled around it. As I watched, a piece of meat fell from the cliff onto the ground, and an eagle swept down and seized the meat. I looked up. There, far above me, were men. They were throwing down large pieces of meat into the valley below. And then I saw that this was how the men of the land got diamonds out of the dangerous valley of the snakes. When they threw pieces of meat down on top of the diamonds, some of the precious stones would stick to the meat. Then an eagle would swoop down, seize the meat, and carry it back up to the land above. As soon as the eagle settled to eat, the men would run at it waving sticks and shouting to scare it away. Then they would take away the diamonds that had stuck to the meat and leave the meat itself for the eagle to eat. As soon as I understood this, I ran and grabbed hold of one of the pieces of meat and held it up over my head. An eagle swooped down on it and seized it with his claws. Then he flew back up out of the valley with me dangling beneath him, holding on to the meat with all my strength. As soon as my feet touched the mountainside, I let go of the piece of meat and ran towards the men at the cliff's edge. They were disappointed to see that they had caught only another man, rather than a handful of diamonds. But I said to them, "Don't worry, I am an honest man, and Allah has delivered me from the valley of the snakes. Out of gratitude, I will give you some of the diamonds I have brought with me." Then I gave handfuls of diamonds to all of them. When I told them my story, they were amazed, for no one before had ever come alive from the valley of snakes.